Welcome back. All right, the trade deadline is April 12th. So, the trade deadline is 2 months from today, as I'm recording this. So, it's not too early to start looking at who might be sellers and using winning percentage to decide the bottom three, which means Detroit, that was expected. Ottawa, expected. Vancouver, unexpected that they would be in the bottom three in winning percentage in the National Hockey League. I had expected probably Los Angeles, but LA has a better winning percentage right now than Vancouver. So what we're looking at too is, remember, crossing the border into Canada. So if an American team wants to make a deal with a Canadian team, we still have the 2-week quarantine. So that likely means that if a Canadian and American team are going to make a deal, that deadline's around March 29th in order to make that work. Now, it's possible you could push that back about a week, but it's unlikely that a Canadian team would be looking to get a rental, make that trade April 12th, knowing that player won't be able to play until after April 26th. So that's problematic. So if any of these teams are going to make trades across the border, watch for them to happen sooner rather than later. Although, if Vancouver were sending a rental down south of the border, they don't have the 14 days as the outline there. But anything Vancouver would get back would if Vancouver was getting anything back. So we're going to start with Detroit, because to me it feels like Detroit is the one most in need of extra assets, even though they already have extra draft picks in this coming draft. But they have $8.18 million in cap space, according to Cap Friendly. And as the year goes along, that gets bigger. So at the trade deadline, it becomes more and more money. Now, the reason cap space is important is because there's going to be teams that are looking to make deals. Let's say, for instance, Boston wants to make a major trade, but they don't have the cap space to make it work. Boston makes a phone call to Steve Yzerman. Hey, we want to make a deal, but we don't have the cap space for it. If we give you this guy and we give you a second-round draft pick, how does that sound? And Detroit goes deal. So that's why the cap space thing makes a difference. And a team that is truly rebuilding will have cap space. They will. So they're 2021 UFAs to keep an eye on if they're going to actually just have pure rentals at the deadline. Or Darren Helm, who has been, if they trade him, it'll probably be retained salary. There might be a team that wants him on a third or fourth line role. Valtteri Filppula, who has been struggling offensively this season, but there may be a market again. Luke Glendening, who is on the injured list right now, I believe. I know he got hurt in the last game. Bobby Ryan, who has proven in Detroit that he can still play. So Bobby Ryan will have some value at the trade deadline. He got off to a fast start, cooled off a bit, but it's obvious the guy can still play in the National Hockey League. Sam Gagner, not sure on any value there. Mark Stahl, he does have a no movement clause, but again, Mark Stahl, heavily likely to probably get moved, I would think, at the deadline. Patrick Nemeth, John Merrill, those are two defensemen who may have some value there. John Merrill, I would think, would have the more value of the two. And then in net, if they really wanted to make a splash, maybe Jonathan Bernier ends up going. But there are a couple of ways they can go with their goaltending, so we're going to come back to that, right? So when you look at their 2021 picks, they have 1 first-round pick, 3 second-round picks, 2 third-round picks, a 4th, a 5th, and a 6th. They do not have a 7th-round pick. I am sure that Steve Yzerman's looking at the current situation with the 2021 draft, and he's probably not too happy about it, that he's got all these extra picks in a draft, which may very well be a good draft. It may have a lot of good players in it. We just don't know, because a lot of them haven't played yet. So he has extra draft picks to play with if he chooses to. Let's say he sends a second-round pick to another team in exchange for a second-round pick in 2022 or a pair of thirds in 2022, that kind of thing. The 2022 draft, they have 1 in each round, and it's their own. And then the question marks, players who still have term after this year. So think like Brian Coleman, right, for the New Jersey Devils, or Barclay Goodrow for San Jose. They turn those guys into first-round picks. So for Detroit, for guys who have cap certainty beyond this season, which is important, Robbie Fabry has a couple years left on his contract before he's a UFA. Troy Stetcher could be a very interesting pickup for a team at the deadline. And Thomas Greiss, if they choose to keep Bernier and trade Greiss, Greiss is signed through next year. So again, for that cap certainty, teams may very well be willing to pay a bigger premium for the guy who has a contract into next year than they would for the guy who is a UFA this year. So again, with Bernier and Grice, I would think odds are they keep one and they may move the other. And then Pickard would remain as the backup for the rest of the season, because at 3-10-2, we know Detroit's not going to make the playoffs. So it'll be interesting to see if they keep both goaltenders or if they move one, because goaltenders may very well have a premium price attached to them, especially with the 3 goaltender situation that we're going through this year. Every team has to have 3. So, yeah, Detroit may be very active. Now, Ottawa, with $9.35 million in cap space, and again, that number just keeps going up. So this is just cap space for the season. What they have currently is actually higher than this, but for this video, it's fine. We'll just make it like this, and we'll just keep it simple, right? So their 2021 UFAs, Derek Stepan, who we know is on the market. He wants to go, and I think they'd like to move him. But they also have Artem Anisimov, who's cleared waivers. Remember, if a guy's cleared waivers within the last 30 days and you acquire him, you do not need to waive him again before sending him to the taxi squad. Anisimov might be attractive to a team as a taxi squad member who could perhaps jump in. Think like what Corey Perry has done for Montreal. Cedric Paquette, who they picked up from Tampa, they might be able to recoup a future asset through him. Alex Galchenyuk, it's not working with Galchenyuk in Ottawa, at least not so far. 7 games played, I believe, and 1 goal to his name. Eric Goodbranson, there may be a market for Goodbranson. He gets traded a lot, which tells you 2 things. Either, well, teams like to trade him, or teams are willing to trade for him. So he may have some value. Again, with the amount of cap space they have, Ottawa can retain salaries here and there. Mike Riley, who I think's been okay. Riley is I think okay as a top 6 option. May very well draw some interest in Braden Coburn, who cleared waivers. And again, when a guy clears waivers, it doesn't necessarily mean they don't have any value. 2021 picks, they have 1 first, 2 seconds, a third, nothing in the 4th or the 5th, and then they have a 6th and a 7th round pick. In 2022, they have 1 first round pick, 2 seconds, and then 1 in the 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th, and they have 2 7th round picks. They are at 2-12-1, 167 winning percentage. They're not going to the playoffs, but they knew that before the season started. It's just, I think this has been rougher than they might have anticipated, so we'll see whether or not guys get moved. And then the question marks for me, guys with term beyond this year, again, the Barclay Goodrow, Coleman rule. Chris Tierney may very well have some value. Nick Paul. I don't think that Nick Paul is going to end up getting protected in the expansion draft. I think he's played pretty well. If I'm Seattle, he's the guy that I'm taking from Ottawa. It may very well be that Ottawa looks at the deadline and says, you know what, we don't want to lose Nick Paul for nothing. So they may look to trade him out and see what they can get back. Josh Brown is another one. They picked him up from Florida. It hasn't really worked, but he does have term through next year. He may be attractive to a team looking for a rental at the deadline who still has a contract into next year. So we have like the rentals that are here, but these guys are kind of sort of rentals, but it's a rental for a year and a half. Maybe we should call it a lease agreement because it's year to year, right? It's a year, so they have a lease agreement with the guy. It doesn't work. Don't say it doesn't work. Now, the interesting one on the board is Vancouver because there's no cap space. There just isn't. At the deadline, there might be a little bit, I guess, depending on how they handle the roster between now and then. And then you look at their UFA list, and it's an expensive UFA list. So you got Brandon Sutter. They would have to retain salary to move Sutter. Tanner Pearson. I think they could move Pearson without retaining salary. I could see Pearson going, not because they want to lose Pearson, but because they don't want to lose Pearson for nothing. You look at the nightmare that was the 2020 UFA season where they just lost everybody. They want to avoid doing that again. Alex Edler. This is likely, I think it's his last year. I don't know that he comes back next year, but it's possible that Edler might do what Oland and Salo did, sign in Tampa. It's possible. But for Edler, he may end up being a rental at the deadline. I wouldn't be entirely shocked. The problem is, again, that $6 million price tag. They would have to retain some of that. Jordy Ben and Travis Hamonic, who's currently on long-term injured reserve. So as long as he comes back in time, he could be an interesting rental. 2021 picks, they have a pick in each round. 2022, they don't have a third-round draft pick. They have not been stockpiling draft picks. Vancouver has never been stockpiling draft picks. And this is something you want to be doing if you're a rebuilding team. So they're not rebuilding. This was supposed to be where things get better. Now, the question marks on the Vancouver roster, guys who have I think some value who still have a contract beyond this season. Antoine Roussel, maybe not worth the full $3 million. I didn't put Jay Beagle up here. I can't see Jay Beagle bringing back value at the deadline. But Roussel might. There might be a team out there that looks at the grit, the sandpaper. Maybe even Dallas would circle back and say, you know what, we could use Roussel as a depth guy. We'll pay $2 million of the $3 million. We're not giving him the full $3 million. And then the Canucks do a $1 million retention. Something like that. And maybe Dallas would trade a mid-round draft pick to get him back. Jake Virtanen, he's an RFA next year. So a team that picks him up, they get to keep him till next year and then decide what to do. The thing is, he's already making $2.55 million as the cap hit. That does make it tough to trade him when he's just not producing. He's not giving the Canucks what they need. And the fact that he's a young forward not doing that for a team that needs a young forward to do it might drop his value as well. Braden Holtby I've got on the list for a simple reason that he's a UFA next year. His numbers so far, he may not be an attractive target for Seattle. It might be better for Vancouver to see if there's a market for Holtby, if Holtby be willing to go, because it just doesn't feel like it's been a good fit so far. And then maybe pick up a goaltender in return and a pick, and maybe the goaltender you pick up in return is a guy that qualifies for exposure to Seattle, and you're basically allowing for a downgrade, and another team's picking up Holtby. But again, that's where things get kind of dicey, because the assumption that Seattle's going to take Holtby to me is insane, because Holtby right now is into his third season of subpar totals. And I don't think Seattle would take Holtby from the Vancouver Canucks if they had the option. I could see Virtanen ending up in Seattle. I could potentially see that, but again, I'm not sure why Seattle would necessarily take that on. That's a whole other conversation for a whole other time. So the Canucks are 6-11. They have a .353 winning percentage. It's a 56-game season. They're already 17 games in. Over the next 39 games, they would have to win, what, like 25 of them? You've got to think probably 25 of them in order to get into the playoffs. I don't know that the math is already not really, really dodgy for them to make the playoffs. But we'll see what happens and which of these players end up being moved at the deadline. But again, Detroit and Ottawa have a nice list of players that might be able to bring them back something at the deadline. For Vancouver, it's a bit more difficult. It's a bit more dicey. And this is where we get into that whole conversation about how do you fix things. Because every day now, there's an article on, well, how do you fix the Canucks? And I don't know. But the amount of cap space means it's more difficult. Ottawa and Detroit are in pretty good shape going forward. And both of them have top prospects coming up who may very well be game changers, especially for Ottawa's blue line. As bad as things look right now on Ottawa's blue line, they're going to look that good in a couple of years. At least they should. And on the Vancouver front, Podkolzin's still yet to come over. But outside of that, there's a lot of unknowns. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. As always, don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.